Right, we've got to 2 o'clock. I don't know if people are getting tired, but hopefully you're joining in. Let's get started. Candace has replied to me in Welsh, but that's the only Welsh I know, pretty much. Okay, so analyzing open-ended survey question responses with MAXQDA. This is a topic I've talked about quite a few times over the years. It's changed a bit in MAXQDA over time, but I first learnt this work at the University of Surrey in a project under the British National Centre for Research Methods. So I owe some acknowledgement to them, but it's changed a little bit over time as the software has advanced. Let me just make a few general comments about this kind of work before we get into the details. I advocate a kind of hybrid solution to the problem of analyzing this quite tricky data, where the computer does what computers do well, things like counting, searching, and grouping texts and words and so on. And you, the analyst, the human, does what humans do well, deciding what is important, what is useful, what is interesting. Computers are not so good at that, although all this talk about ChatGPT and artificial intelligence and so on, that may be changing. But for the moment, I suggest a hybrid where you remain in control of the computer and use the computer as your assistant. Your analysis, different people and different data have different purposes and so on. There's a whole range or spectrum between analyzing this data in a fully manual way, as people have done for a long time with pure qualitative data, and a fully automated solution. Be careful what you wish for. If we ever get the fully automated solution, then you as researchers and analysts will be out of jobs because we'll simply plug it into a computer and won't need the humans at all. So I'm talking about the situation where we have asked some open-ended questions in the middle of or in part of a survey, probably online these days. So we've got a mixture of closed questions and open questions. And how you approach them depends on a whole range of aspects. What your analysis goals are. Are you looking for explanation and insight? In which case you want to be more manual because you're going to be reading and interpreting. Are you simply looking for quantification and statistics, and you've asked an open-ended question because you couldn't think how to phrase the closed questions adequately? Then you may do more automation at this end. How did you collect the data? If it was recorded speech and fully transcribed, it's likely to be much richer, and so a more manual approach is very likely to pay off. If it was done by interviewers actually typing in what they think they heard, you're pretty much sunk from the outset. If it's self-completion, you've got to be aware that we'll be typing mistakes and errors in it. How did you design your questionnaire? Did you group your open questions all together, in which case you've made a kind of conversation episode, and you may find that the answers to one question are cropping up in the answers to others. You'll have to work more manually for that. If you spread your open questions around one at a time with lots of closed questions between them, you'll be able to analyze each question separately, and you may be able to use more automation. You've got to think about these things before you get too far into your analysis. I just want to ask a provocative question now. Who does the work? For a long time, we've had surveys being done by teams of interviewers going around knocking on people's doors, sometimes with laptop computers and putting the answers in. Who does the work of analysis in that situation? Well, I suggest that with those closed questions, it's the analyst who fixes the categories in advance. So in the design of the questionnaire, they decide what answers are acceptable. Those are the pre-programmed answers or the ones put on the show card and so on. And what the respondent is asked to do is to code. The respondent is asked a question. They think in their own language what that question is. And then they're asked which of these possible answers most closely fits what's in your head. That is a coding task. And we ask the respondents, for years we've been asking respondents to do that once off, each question once only. If you ask open-ended questions, and now the internet gives us ways of collecting richer textual data, We can fix the categories after we've collected the data, when we know actually what the full range is. And it's the analyst who does the coding work. That's what we're engaged in this session now. Who's going to give you a better coding job? The respondent doing it once off, or the analyst doing it many, many times? I think we might discover that actually we've been collecting our data quite inefficiently in the classic ways. How are you going to approach the analysis? Case-by-case analysis is routine in qualitative work. Here we are. We pick one case, a respondent, and we have all their responses to all their questions. This is a classic interview which has been analyzed qualitatively for a long time, originally manually, lately with computers and so on. Our quantitative cousins have been using the variable perspective. They think of one question, for example, question 31, and then they look at the responses from all the different cases, 1,000, 1,005, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. That's how they work. In this instance, we qualitative people, if we're the ones who've been asked to do these open-ended questions, we're going to have to get used to working more in the variable approach. So the data I'm going to use is from the English language example project that comes with all your MAXQDA licenses, the work-life balance. There's a little survey. It has an online questionnaire with 55 responses who were asked 2 open questions and 19 closed questions, demographic and attitudinal variables. And the 2 open questions were asked separately, so I can analyze them separately. That is the data. So now let's have a look at it. Here I have it in Excel spreadsheet format, because this is the most likely way that you're going to get your data as an output from your survey tool. So we get a spreadsheet. We get our survey questions in their full text condition along the top. We get an identification of the respondents, hopefully, as the first item of data in the first column. And then we get the data, the answers to the questions. Now, these at this part of the survey are all closed questions. But if I scroll to the right, eventually we find some open question answers. This is an open question. Why would you like to spend more time on this particular activity? And people have typed in their own words. This is the open-ended question response that we really need to find out how to analyze with this data. There's a little bit of preparation that I recommend. Some is essential, but there are other things that I recommend that you do before you try and import this data into your MAXQDA project. Essentially, you must insert a new column at the beginning. So I want to insert I want the home menu, and I want to insert a column. And I'm going to call this column document group. It's how the data will be grouped in the document system when we import it into MAXQDA. Now, what we're essentially going to do is put something and copy it down. It might be the first wave of the survey. So I put wave 1 into the first cell and copy it, and then paste it all the way down. I won't go all the way, but so that wave 1 is there, row after row after row. That means that when I import it, all of these cases will be put into a new document group inside MAXQDA, which is called wave 1. Actually, in the example I'm going to go on with, I called it survey, but you might have data from wave 1, and you might then ask the same people again in a slightly different thing and call it wave 2. And that's how you can distinguish whether it's the first wave of wave of your survey or the second, and so on. That's why I've mentioned that. You need to have a unique identifier for each case, and the survey tool has done that with this RESP 01, respondent 01, respondent 02, and so on. If those are not unique, you may have to do some work there to make them unique. Then we have the data. We don't do anything to the data itself, but I look at the top row. The questions, whatever text is in the cells here is going to be reproduced inside MAXQDA as the identification of the items below. The full question texts are too long, so you need to edit these. So how old are you could simply be replaced with the word age. Relationship status, we might take this one and simply delete everything down to there, and if you want, and so on. So we can edit those to make them shorter. They'll work much better. And here, this one, I would just simply take the beginning of this and delete it, and just have the question itself. The full question, or this can be abbreviated as well. It will appear as a code name. So I am going to shorten it even further and call it "spend more time on this particular activity." So those are edits that you do. Now I'm now going to have the same data. I've opened up a second workbook where I've got this data after I've done that edit. You can see I've got survey in place of the wave 1 that I used, and I've got relatively short labels going across the top here, so that when they come into MAXQDA, they are readable in short forms, in narrow columns and things like that. So that's setting up the data. Don't change any of your data down here, I suggest, because otherwise you're invalidating your research. That's the data that is been provided by your respondents. The edits are in your own setup, your question labels and that kind of thing. I need to close that in order to import it into MAXQDA. So now I've got an empty MAXQDA project and I'm ready to import. I've just opened this project ahead, and in classic MAXQDA style, it's come by default to the import menu. So there's a special import section for this kind of data, this survey data. And if I click on it, I want to use the import from an Excel spreadsheet. If you are using SurveyMonkey as your tool for conducting your survey, there is a direct process to move data from SurveyMonkey. That would bypass most of the last bit I've been talking about, the setup in Excel. But there are many tools out there, and SurveyMonkey is the only one that MAXQDA has so far created a link for. So in most cases, you'll wash your data through an Excel spreadsheet en route between collecting the data on the internet and analyzing it in MAXQDA. So I want the import from Excel spreadsheet, and I've now got to go and find it. And I forgot to set this setup in advance. So bear with me while I just navigate. MAXQDA is very good at remembering these kind of things. But I obviously didn't. So I want survey results, work-life balance, edited. There, that's the one I want. Make sure I get the right spreadsheet. Multiple tabs don't work too well in that stage, so you need to have your data in as a one sheet workbook. So now MAXQDA has found it, and we've moved on to the second stage of the import. A rather frightening looking dialogue, but MAXQDA has done most of the work for us already. Check the questions at the top. Which column contains the labels for the document group? Now you see why I called the first column document group, because it's found it itself. But the document name, it's picked up the wrong one. So I want the response ID. If you call the second column document name, MAXQDA will fill that in for you as well. It'll find it, but I left it as response ID in that. Now, that's the first two columns. Now the main data. Here, MAXQDA has had a go at guessing whether the data is closed questions or open questions. The closed questions, it's going to create variables for in the variables section of the project. So it's put ticks where it expects those to be. And I don't need it to re-import the document group and the response ID. But age, relationship, children, these are all perfectly valid variable ones. We want to come down to why more time on this particular activity? That is a open question, and the example text shows, and so it puts a tick in the code column. It calls it code because the work we need to do is to code it. There are two open questions. They have been identified correctly, so I haven't had to do anything really other than just take off the ticks for the first two rows, which don't need to be brought in again. So it's got all of that right. And I want to import all of the open questions and the variables, leave those ticks in place. Little discussion of this one down here. Do I want to code empty cells? I strongly recommend that you leave that unticked. then MAXQDA will only create a data segment where there is some data that has been imported, and you will get an accurate count of how many people answered the question. On online surveys, there's an awful lot of non-response. People can't be bothered to type. If you tick code empty cells, it'll create a count for every single response, whether there's any data in it or not, which is much less helpful. So I think leave that blank. If you're doing multiple imports, this will come into effect. You want to make sure you don't double import, repeat the same data, so those questions will become important. We don't have that today, so I can click OK. Now it's just looking at the variables, and it's asking what kind of variable do I want. It gives me a data type preview, and most of these it has picked up to be text, but the number of children is a pure number, so that's coming in as a number. Unfortunately, we asked some age type questions with data ranges 30 to 39, so those will have to be treated as texts because that's not a straightforward number, even though it might look like that to us. So those numbers have to come in as text because they can't be interpreted as numbers, and so on. In essence, MAXQDA won't be able to ask for greater than or less than and things like that. So we check all of those, and then we click the import button, and MAXQDA has now done it. Those 55 items have been imported, and some data has appeared behind my screen. This little dialog pops up telling us what has happened. It's found 55 texts, 2 codes, i.e. 2 open questions, and 20 variables, and it has found no data it couldn't handle, so there are no ignored documents. It's a good idea to copy this and then close it, and from your memos, perhaps open a free memo or the project memo, and put today's date and paste in that little import thing that I just copied, so that we've got a record of it. In the project memo, we know exactly what has been done. We've got that logged, and close that. Okay, so now I've got the data ready here in my MAXQDA project. I can move this down a little bit. So it's created a document group for survey, and it has put all of the 55 or 52 cases, I think they were, all into it. It's created 2 codes with the labels from the top row of the spreadsheet. Why more time on this particular activity, and types of flexible work arrangements available. Those have also come in. It's created some memos. What are those memos saying? Oh, it's just given the text as it stands at the moment. It has attached those codes to the data from the 2 columns where those were. So why this text here highlighted is the answer to the question, why do you want to spend more time on this particular activity? And this text here is the answer to the second question. So now looking at the numbers, I can see that the first 3 respondents answered both questions, but respondent 4, if I double click on that, only answered 1. The first one, why more time? And down here, respondent 10 didn't answer either question. And down here, the numbers show me 48 responses were collected to the first question and 22 to the second. So this is useful information. This comes because I did not tick the code all responses. I left it blank. So now we're ready to start analyzing. One other task, which I will just skip by jumping to a ready-made one to save a moment. I have, it's exactly the same data, but I have now added the full question text to the code memo for each question. You'll be astonished how many times during this work that you find yourself thinking, what exactly question did this person think they were answering? So it's useful to have the full question text typed into the code memo for each question. You can then review it just by hovering over at any stage if you're unsure what the exact question wording was. Now, by activating all of the survey documents, and if it's part of a larger project with other data, we just want the survey documents activated, and say one question, the types of flexible work arrangements available, I can get 55 documents, 1 code, 22 data segments into my retrieve segments window. I've got down here all the answers to the one question. And for a long time, we've been able to work this way. I can work from this window and do coding. but MAXQDA has given us a new function tool. So I'm just going to deactivate that and go to the analysis menu, where we have a function categorize survey data. And that's what I'm going to use now for the next stage of this work. So I've selected it, and it asks me to drag and drop a code of survey question, in other words, one of these two questions, into this window. So let's have the flexible work arrangements question dragged in, and I can limit it to just activated documents. If I want to look at just wave 1 or wave 2 by activating one group, I can do that as well. That becomes quite useful. Click OK, and a new window will open up on top with the data that we want to work with. And here it comes. So now I've got my categorized survey data window, where I'm ready now for the next stage. I can see more answers in this, more responses than I could get in my old retrieve segments panel. And I've got various functions available to assist me. So lots of ways I can work with this data. And this is where, remember those parameters? Did I want to work manually? What are my analysis goals? How manually, how much automation, and so on? How much am I deciding what's useful and how much I'm leaving to the computer, and so on? Those come into play now in the approach that I adopt at this stage. For starting off on an automation foot, I could open up a word cloud for this data. It's not very exciting data in this example. Hopefully your data will be much richer, but the word cloud gives you a first go at what are the key words here. And if I hover over home, I've got 13 hits, it tells me. I can also, by clicking on here, I can turn this into a word frequency table if you prefer to work that way. So this can give me some idea of keywords that show up in this data. It's not very rich, so I don't find that it works that well. I'm just looking at my notes to see what did I recommend. Well, I'm going to look for home office, I think. So having got some ideas from there, there are tools to go on from there, but it's slightly better if we use the search and autocode function from here. So I'm going to clear what was already there and start a new entry with home. And I don't want to limit it to whole words. It's not case sensitive, but only in the listed responses. Yes, that's important. I'm only looking in what I'm seeing here. Run the search, and there we are. Home has appeared an awful lot. So a lot of flexible working refers to home. Some refer to home office, and some refer to home only. But if I want to code this now, I've got this bar has changed, and now I've got 14 responses, and I've got a code with a new code button here. So I can click on that. And here's another interesting thing to pay attention to. I've got the choice not only of just the search hits the word home, or the sentence, or the paragraph, but I've got the whole response. And this one is only available through this kind of a tool. You can't code whole responses easily if you do search from the document browser or the retrieved segments. So let's go with that. It's telling me that it's going to be an autocode for home, but I'm going to delete the bits that I don't want and just call it home. I can choose a color for it if I want, and off we go. And it has coded 14 segments, and we're away. So those have all got the home code. If I go back to my types of flexible arrangement, oh, I'm sorry, I need to close the search. I've got to close the search, and I come back to my types of flexible arrangement. I can see here in the codes column those where home has been added, and there are some where it hasn't. If I click on the home code, I get just the 14 responses which have got home. But I can come back to here, and now let's look for something else. Working hours. Let's search on hours. And run the search. And there we are. And I can again create a new code. This time, let's just search the hits only and give it a purple color and click OK. And there we got that 10 segments. So now close the search and see the difference. When I look at the home codes, I get all of the autocode home. Sorry, I get all of these are the homes. And if I click on the hours, I just get the word hours. That's not very helpful. So it's not a good choice to autocode just the words. The responses, if they're very long responses, then sentences or paragraphs might be more useful. If they're short responses like these, then coding the whole response works rather better. So that's the beginning of some tools. I also have the possibility of auto-coding with dictionaries. Let me come back to types of flexible. And if you've got MAXQDA Plus, so that you have the MAXDICTIO module, you can create dictionaries. If you're going to do a lot of this work, and particularly if you're going to repeat it multiple times, you can identify all the occasions when people might refer to words that mean family, so children, family, grandchildren, sisters, parents, and things. Where any of those words are encountered in an auto code with dictionary, MAXQDA will apply the code family as a holder for the whole lot of them. Education, references to learning, school, students, studying, and so on, those will get the code education. It won't distinguish whether they talked about studying or university or school. They all get the one code education. It's a way of sort of course coding in a hurry, and leisure, friends, hobbies, and so on. So we've got all of those, and I can choose, if I highlight leisure and say deactivate category, it gets a little no entry mark, I can temporarily exclude that from the dictionary, from the auto coding of the next step if I want. It'll only look for family and education words. It won't look for leisure words if that's what I want. By the way, these dictionaries, you can copy them, move them about, you can attach them to different projects, you can share them with your colleagues, all sorts of things are possible. Dictionaries can be moved around as MAXQDA items. Let's leave it like that with leisure deactivated, and let's try autocode with dictionary, and we'll autocode sentences. Only enlisted responses. Ignore inactive categories. That means the leisure one is inactive. It will be ignored. Click OK. Do we get anything? We've got something. Oh, one segment. One education segment was found. And it was a miscoding, because the person said, of course, and course was an education keyword, somebody talking about being on a course. So that is an incorrect one. Respondent 43, let's go back to the top and find 43 and that education. I can uncode, I can correct a mistake. I don't want that code by clicking on that X. That wasn't a very successful one. I think possibly the other one might have been a little bit better. I've also got the possibility of doing, in fact, let me just, I think I'm going to close this and do another categorize with the other survey question. Why more time on this particular activity? Drag that one in and OK. So I've switched to the other question. It's going to come in a moment. There we are. We've got longer answers here. Let's just try that autocode with dictionary again and autocode the sentences. "41 segments. Now we've got some data. Okay, so we can see a lot of family and education. Well, of course, no leisure, because I was excluding that. So if we check on, say, the family code, we should find things generally. You see, my sisters, my grandchildren, raised my children, to my children. So it's correctly picking up words that relate to family, and so we're seeing there. Don't be confused as seeing education here. These are the other codes. In this table, it's showing all the responses that are coded to family, so it doesn't display the family code here. That would be a waste of space. It displays other codes. So this one is also coded to education. This one is not. And if I go back to the header one and find any row which has got a blank, this one has not been coded to either family or education, and so on. That would have got a leisure because it's got the word sailing in if I'd done that. Okay, something else I can do is I can analyze sentiments here, whether people talk positively or negatively. This is not very rich data, but it attempts to identify whether people are speaking positively or negatively. Most are coming up neutral. It does it by counting positive or negative words and checking the difference. If there's many more positive than negative words, 19 to 4, a difference of 15, then it's coming up that person is certainly on the positive side. But where 12 and 14, no wonder that's showing as neutral, and so on. The sentiment analysis, I think, is only available in English and German at the moment, but you can auto-code the responses with that sentiment, the neutral, positive, or whatever, and then that might be useful to convert that into a variable for further use with other variables. But let's close that. And now I'm going to go back to my home. I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to open a coded project here. So here's the same data, but now with many more answers. See, why more time in this activity? 48, but now we've got many more possible responses, children, family, and so on, and the types of flexible work arrangements and so on. How do we report this data? Well, if we go to the analysis one, first of all, let's activate the survey and let's activate the types of flexible arrangements available and look at the code frequencies tool, for example. Let's insert the activated codes. So these are all the responses to the work arrangements. These are the codes it's going to work with. Now, actually, I don't want to report the 22 rows. So I'm going to, having used it as the header code to bring them in, I'm going to delete it with that one and just have the analysis codes. Let's click OK. I know I'm going quite fast. I get a table with the frequencies and so on. That's very exciting. I could send that off to my QTT or export it, but actually let's turn it into a chart. Now that chart is nice. For some reason, I find the horizontal bar charts quite useful with this kind of data because it's easier to read the labels at the side rather than underneath. So now I've got something and I've got various, I can choose whether I want to have percentages or numbers, all sorts of things I can do. I can add another heading. Somewhere one of these is an extra heading. Display text, and I can double click here to say this question was flexible work arrangements. So I've labeled it. There we are, and that comes up, and then that's ready to be sent off to QTT and so on. If I go back to my chart, I can choose to order it by frequency. So now I've got the most frequent one at the top, come back to the chart. It remembers all the other settings, but now the chart looks rather neater with the biggest bar at the top and the shortest one at the bottom, or I can have it the other way up, whatever you like. Explore those. So that's what you can do, just reporting your frequencies. But what I think is really exciting is if we go into the mixed methods and combine the analysis of our variables, the closed questions, with the analysis of the open questions. So let's look at the why more time on this particular activity and open up the cross tab. Let's reset this, clear the list. So for these, it's quite useful to click on the button, insert all variable values as conditions. And I'm going to click on the age variable and bring that in. And it's now, luckily, it sorts these in a sensible order. So I've got all the possible ages. These are all going to be columns in my table. Activated documents and codes, click OK. And now I get an exciting table, which is showing me for increasing age groups, how they've, which people have, the number of times they've mentioned things. So family appears to be a little bit more important at the younger age group than it does at the older age group. Children, on the other hand, are being mentioned more in the older age groups than the very young. Perhaps the 19-year-olds don't have children. No surprise there, and so on. Sports has only come in once in the 30-year-old group. It's not surprising the 60-year-olds aren't talking about sports quite so much. No great surprises here. It's quite trivial data. But the point, I hope, is made that you can combine inside your MAXQDA data from your closed questions with data from your open questions to come up with interesting results. Let me look and see what questions we've got. Ask in the Q&A rather than the chat. I'm going to look at the Q&A for finding these questions. So Christopher, A question referring to the topic of importing the answers of multiple choice questions we talked about separately earlier. Did we? These are separate. Oh, okay. This is someone I'm picking up an email conversation with you previously. Christopher, I'll take that separately because it's not so much a general interest to everybody else. Kelly, what have we got? What is the difference between categorized survey data and the smart coding tool? I now use the smart coding tool for survey questions, and I don't see a big difference in the tool. The most significant difference, Kelly, is in the smart code in the categorized survey one. Just bring this one in. If you're doing the autocode, search and autocode, you have the option to autocode whole responses, which is a very useful one for the survey questions. And also, I think you'll find it automatically puts any codes you create as subcodes for the question, which is quite useful as well. Estelle, can you import Excel data from password protected files? Golly, I've never been asked that before, and I have no idea. There's a very simple thing you can do, all of you, with this kind of thing, and it links into something I was intending to say earlier. If you have done an online survey and you've got 2,750 responses, before you run a single import, oh, go away, Windows, before you do try and import all 2,750 with your first attempt at an import, what I suggest you do is make a little sample spreadsheet with just some of your data. One open question, or maybe two open questions, and half a dozen of your closed questions, and perhaps 10 or 20 cases in a separate spreadsheet, just as a little test. Get as much variety as you can in that, ideally, and try running your import on that. If that goes without problems, then it's worth trying the 2,750 in your proper book. But if you run into a snag on that, you've saved yourself one of those awful things when the computer is chuntering away minutes after minutes after minutes, and you don't know if it's embarked on an impossible task and you ought to abandon it, or is it just slow because there's an awful lot of data. So run little tests. So Estelle, create a little workbook with a password and try importing from it. I suspect that it might not work. Otherwise, what's the point of having passwords? Vince, why would we not tick variable on open-ended items? That was on at the import stage. Because you don't want to have a variable created with a separate value for every single case, because each open answer will be different. If they're genuine open questions with responses as long as these in this display here, you don't want that data cluttering up your variables, because the whole purpose of variables is to group similar cases together because they're all the same age, or they've all got the same number of children, or they all got the same educational value, or they're all from the same country, or that's that kind of thing. That's what variables are for. But these answers are all different, so there's no point in grouping on them. So that's why we don't want to tick the variable on the open-ended items. Okay, let me have a look at the chats. Have anybody else put some questions in the chat? So going back, Anna Paula was asking how to view all open responses of a code, how to manually recode an open question follow-up from this view. And I'm not quite sure. Well, hopefully this categorized survey is answering your first question, all the responses of a code. And if I click on a code like money, I just get all the responses that are coded to money. If I want to recode from any of these, I can. I can select any one of these. Let's just say this one, I want to add the arts code to this. I click on it, drag it over to arts, and it adds the arts code to it. So it's easy to manually add any of the existing codes on those if that's what you want. I'm going to undo that because that was a nonsense. Utam, question about autocode with dictionary. Did you enter family and education somewhere first? Yes. Yes, I have to set those dictionaries up separately. And it's quite a lot of work creating dictionaries. So it's only a practicable approach if you're going to repeat the survey questions several times at least across different projects, different data groups, or maybe at least different waves of your project. For a one-time use, you might as well just code everything manually. It's not worth creating the dictionary with the possibility of more incorrect codings. The dictionary is a quick and dirty way of coding if you accept that there will be a number of incorrect codings because a word has been used in a different sense. I had it with course, of course, rather than a training course. But the dictionary is one of the tools that works, has been put into this categorized survey data. Somebody else was asking, what's the difference between the categorized survey data and the ordinary smart coding tool? And I think you'll find that the smart coding tool doesn't have the dictionary necessarily. I answered all of the questions. Just come back to the questions. I think I have. Please ask again if you think I've missed your question. Oh, yes. Okay, we've got a few more now. Anna Paula, is it better to work with data from Excel or SPSS? What are the differences? Well, okay. If your data is already in SPSS, I have to ask myself, does SPSS actually carry the text of open questions? It may be you're moving just closed question, just quantitative data into a MAXQDA project from SPSS. So you may have to do some merging of your open answers from there. So Excel is a good place to do that merging. So I think it's best to work with Excel, but there may be some circumstances where you've got too much of the data already in SPSS, and that's why MAXQDA, somebody's obviously requested the facility to move data direct from SPSS into MAXQDA. But it's not a route I would positively choose unless it's actually forced on you by circumstances. Generally speaking, by far the best approach is to do your online survey, output it into an Excel spreadsheet, clean it up a bit with the necessary edits that I was discussing at the beginning of this session, and then import it from Excel. Someone, Yama, for multiple choice questions, can I upload the Excel file with those multiple answers to MAXQDA? Yes, and somebody else has been asking me about this problem. It's the question, the kind of question that is asked with the tick all that apply response. So what is your experience of something? Tick all that apply. So some people may answer with one thing, and someone else may put 3, and somebody else 2 and 4, and so on. Those should be output as separate columns into your Excel spreadsheet, and they will appear as separate variables, one each. And I think that is the best treatment for them, because then all the people that ticked option 2, whether it was the only option they ticked or multiple options, you can identify. So I'm not quite sure why it didn't work for you, Yama. You say when you upload these in MAXQDA, somehow it didn't work, but it should be 1 or 0, yes. Or yes or no works as well, but 1 or 0. But possibly if you put 1 or 0, look at the on the import stage, did you identify them as text variables, as integer variables, or as Boolean variables? That may be having an impact at your import. That's why it didn't work, maybe. Look at that stage on a small sample and experiment around that. Melissa, can a Microsoft Forms survey output responses be directly imported to MAXQDA as a type of allowed import? Not as yet, Melissa. If you put in a request through the feedback on MAXQDA that's something you're looking, if enough other people request the same thing, I'm sure MAXQDA will add that as a direct import. But at the moment, it doesn't appear as an option. I can tell you, if I go to the import and look at the survey data options, we only have these 3: Excel, SurveyMonkey, or SPSS. When you see Microsoft Forms appearing there, then you know that it's working. But until then, I'm afraid you've got to go through Excel. Cesar, you mentioned wave 1 and the survey to be added under the document group. Are these arbitrary or rather standard terms? No, they're arbitrary. They're just examples that I'm coming up with. It's your own, you need your own terminology, that what makes sense in your thing. Whatever you put in that first column will be used as the group header for that group in this part of the document system. Here, we're imagining as this example, in this example, if I were to go home and open the full project from the example projects, it's the work-life balance example I'm opening now. Okay, it's coming from a synchronized file. That's okay. We've got lots of data. We've got interviews, we've got focus group video, websites, literature, and then we have this survey. And here we are, the survey questions and the responses. The survey questions is just a text document showing all the questions. And here is the same data in that English language example. So that's why the word survey gets used to distinguish it from websites, videos, focus groups, and so on. That's why. So it's whatever makes sense to you that you use. Right, we're coming to the end of the 45 minutes, so I'll keep looking for questions, but probably time to think of moving on or go and get yourself a cup of tea before the next session. You've got 45 minutes before the next spotlight. Susan, how is document from Excel different from import survey data? No, you haven't understood, Susan. The import... these are three possible ways of importing survey data. You've got to choose one of these three, either the spreadsheet or the SurveyMonkey or the SPSS. This is just a holder for these three choices. There is no import survey data other than one of these three. I think that's the clear point. You're very welcome. Those of you, the best thanks you can give me is to go and do some really good research, get a good survey and analyze it, and really link up your closed and open questions, because that's something that not so many people follow through on. They just treat them as separate bits of data, but put them together and then you're really getting the power of MAXQDA coming through. So good luck in your research, all of you. Many thanks for listening to me today, and I just wish you the best wishes for your research. Thank you very much.